initially they weren't going to investigate it any further. It was closed. Has something happened since then that they're now looking at it more? And again, I'm emphasising that I don't think there's any question about the captain and the first officer about the way they. There was
evidence tabled in this forum by Captain Woodward, which has now led to the HSB investigating the incident. So.
But I think there was also an issue, again, nothing to do with Jetstar. The pilots relied on the best available information and acted prudently and cautiously, but there was an issue as to whether Air Traffic Control in Darwin or the Bureau of Meteorology could have given some further information that would have assisted them. I think that was it was a systemic issue that may be looked at.
I think there's lots of information that the HSB and CASA always look at, and the ATSB now investigating the incident. I think the ATSB will investigate the incident and put their findings forward, and I'd encourage the committee to ask them for their views on that matter. They've now got all the facts, they've had all the information. They'll be forming their own judgment on the matter. And I'd say that's the benefit of the process we have in this country. We've got a very strong independent investigative body. We've got a strong independent regulator. We should provide all the safety information, and anyone that does have safety information has a duty and in fact a legal responsibility to make that information available, and therefore those independent bodies can fully investigate the issue.
Yes, I think I wouldn't like to think that this committee endangered an investigation by ATSB, so I think leave well alone till that's completed. Could I just ask a question in terms of?
Can I say rather they investigate something that didn't need investigating than not investigate something that perhaps might?
I think that's fair. I think everybody will be in the same position on that, and we encourage, whatever the ATSB believes that they need to investigate. That's
in terms of
that's fine.
The resourcing of ATSB and CASA and their capacity to deal with all the things they've got to deal with, including whether equipped legally or not, and whether there needs to be changes to air regulations or the law, of oversight of other airlines that fly into Australia and their safety standards. Would you be of the view that to enable that to occur, there may have to be increased resources given to CASA and HSB?
Yeah, I think going through the aviation white paper and the review that's taken place of the regulatory environment, there is a renewal and a refreshing of that's been proposed that's quite comprehensive. We think that process is a very important process. We think that as part of that there will be a requirement for more resources within CASA. That is good for aviation and aviation regulation, and we're fully supportive of the process that CASA is going through. We're actively involved with a number of different committees working with CASA on that review process. We think that it's a very important item for aviation in this country going forward, and it's something that we're fully supportive of.
And my final question before I throw it to the other senators is, one of the things that we seem to be getting consistently in Jetstar's case, quite a bit of it, is the fatigue factor and the management of fatigue. Given the frailty of the human body and the way people behave in their spare time, whether they go, when they complete their shift, go and have a lie down or go to the pub or go down to the nearest nightclub or whatever, should there be tougher regulations on off-duty periods for pilots, that have got to do a back of the clock and then return with another back of the clock, however many hours later? I mean,
well, I think first of all, from the whole group and all of the airlines in anywhere in the world, I think there's a dual responsibility. We have a responsibility of making sure that we are doing the right things by the rosters, by the design of them, to ensure that we minimise and eliminate pilot fatigue, and it doesn't become an issue in terms of the safe operation of aircraft. Pilots also have a duty to manage their own fatigue, because obviously I don't think airlines can regulate what pilots do in their spare time, and we have to make sure that it's held as a dual responsibility, and that's the way the systems work. In terms of the group we have been at the leading edge of looking at fatigue management. We've done a lot of work in this space, and I might ask Mr. John Gissing just to talk a bit about some of the work that's taken place from the group's perspective, and then might go on to the Jetstar particular issue. John?
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Qantas has been involved with developing fatigue systems for many years. We have a safety management system which is the overarching structure within which we manage various risks, of which fatigue is one. We implemented right across the group in 2003 through to 2005 an integrated fatigue risk management program which involved all safety critical personnel, engineers and other groups, and we've been working on that for some time. I think it's interesting that the science of fatigue, and as the years have gone by we've learned more and more about the science of fatigue and the ability to predict how fatigue can impact operations generally. We are working with the ICAO proposals at the moment. As recently as October last year, ICAO has tabled the implementation guide in draft form, and across the group we are working on initiatives to improve our fatigue risk management systems in line with those recommendations that we expect at the end of this year to be tabled for consideration by member states. So a lot of work is continuing, and we'll be in a very good position to be well ahead of any requirements that are brought in at that time.
So it's a difficult business, and we'll come to Jetstar in a sec, but I mean, metabolically, a bloke like, I don't want to in any way, I better be a bit careful here. My mate Alan Joyce, it appears he can live on very few hours a day sleep and still perform, you know, at full rip. I mean, some people need 10 hours sleep, some people need 12 hours, some need 3 or 4 hours, perhaps Senator Xenophon only needs a few hours. But, and you can test, you know, when you come through the door for drugs and alcohol and that, but you can't actually test metabolically whether this guy should have had 8 hours sleep and not gone to the pub. You know, how the hell do you manage it?
Well, that's why the dual responsibility comes in, because it's up to the pilot to identify if he's feeling fatigued, that he's not comfortable and shouldn't be flying. And we rely on that as well as the system. Peter, you want to say anything?
Yeah, look, it's a very good point, and what I can say is that we do, to show that dual responsibility works, we do get some pilots who contact us and say, I'm not fit to fly for a multitude of reasons. And when that happens, they are stood down or, you know, don't have to operate the service, and we recrew it.
And they have no fear of incrimination or discrimination?
No. I mean, it's something we take very seriously, fatigue, as to the performance of the crew. And if somebody, we encourage, if somebody's not fit to operate, then we want them to put their hand up. And not fit to operate can be a whole variety of reasons, from personal reasons to fatigue to anything.
What about the flu? Mr Buchanan, have you got something you want to add to that?
I think maybe just to shine a light a little bit on the fatigue risk management process, because I think there's this belief or this perception out there that we run the rostering practices to the limit of the compliance envelope. And the way the fatigue risk management process works is you've got a compliance structure you start with, and then it's really like an onion. You peel back the layers, and each layer adds a little bit more conservativeness to the rostering build. So you start with compliance and the limitations under sort of the CO 48 exemption rules, and you come into that and you look at what the EBAs and the industrial agreements, rostering practices that are agreed between the employees and the company in terms of the roster build agreements. You then come to a number of roster build practices, which are a series of learnings that are from previous incidents and safety investigations and different analysis we've done previously. You then come in another lens and we do fatigue analysis, which takes a look at the whole rosters, and then that builds up an understanding of what the longer term fatigue implications is. You come back then to safety reporting, you come in again to the safety forums in the ASC. You've then got the line managers and the captain and the cabin manager taking last line responsibility for whether someone's fatigued or not when they're on duty. And then, like Mr Joyce said, ultimately you've got then a dual responsibility. That's the organisation and everything we're doing to get there, then the individual also got a responsibility to put their hand up if they're fatigued before they come on to work. And out of that you get a lot of examples, but to sum it up, I mean, that's why our pilots are working on average 18 hours flying a week, where you've got a compliance maximum of 25 hours a week. And the difference there is a lot of these other practices that get built up around that roster build.
So if I was to compare the workload and the rosters and the back of the clock work, etc., between Qantas and Jetstar, from the evidence and from the conversations we've had, I have an impression that you work your guys harder than some other people do. You don't think that's the case?
I don't think that's the case, and I think in the additional questions we provided, for instance, on the stats on the cabin crew, you can see the hours worked are almost identical. And I think also it's worth taking into account those hours, 18 hours a week flying, still exclude 6 weeks annual leave and a whole raft of other measures that are built into the pilot agreements where they're not actually working.
And I think, look at some of the things that we've done in recent times to minimise any risks that we have. In Tokyo, for example, with the tremors that were there, we were concerned about the ability of our pilots and our crew to get appropriate rest. So what we did is changed the schedules, and Jetstar led the way with it. Have actually changed the schedules to actually base the crew in Osaka, and Qantas based the crew in Hong Kong to avoid any potential disruptions to people's sleep and to avoid the fatigue issue. So we demonstrated, I think, on an ongoing basis of how we actually minimise the risk associated with this.
So does CASA have oversight of what you do in Hong Kong and Tokyo?
They do. So what ended up happening in the case of the Tokyo issue is that we went to CASA. We did our own risk assessment about what we regarded as the risks associated with the operations into Tokyo. We did that in a very detailed and formal way. We gave CASA a copy of that. We took the actions ourselves because it's our responsibility to maintain the safety of the operation. And we asked CASA on their views on that risk assessment, and they gave their views back on how that was handled, and regarded that process as very appropriate.
So Jetstar operates in New Zealand on the Australian Air Operator Certificate. How do they supervise what you get up to in New Zealand?
It's the same rules. So the CO48 exemption, which is a rostering rule, so the same as the Australian AOC. And one of the clauses in that is CASA actually have the ability to step in and mandate any rostering requirements they see fit. And it's worth saying that through our whole time of running under the CO48 exemptions, which are from nearly where we started, we haven't had once CASA step in with any concerns on the roster builds.
As I've said before, I wouldn't own an airline if you gave it to me. It's too damn difficult. But you train your New Zealand cadets in Australia on New Zealand pay, rates of pay?
No, we train cadets in 2 locations, one in New Zealand with an organisation called CTC and one in Melbourne under Oxford. Cadets, when they're in training, aren't actually employed by the organisation, so they're just going through the cadet program either in Oxford or CTC.
Right. Senator Xenophon.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just go through, just follow up in terms of Senator Hefferman's line of questioning in relation to the cadets? There was some meeting on this 2 or 3 weeks ago in relation to, I think, 4 cadets that were based in New Zealand. Is that right?
Yeah, we employ all of the initial cadet streams being employed in New Zealand, but maybe if I give a bit of background to the media on that event.
Sure, please do.
Which is what we've been doing with the cadets is we actually want them to get exposure to our best captains and our best training captains around the network. So we've been moving some of the cadets as they go through their training back into Australia. But in doing so, we didn't want any perceptions around us doing that for pay or a way to bypass industrial law. So when they come into the Australian environment, they're paid under an Australian contract, they pay Australian taxes, they pay superannuation when they're based in Australia. But the primary purpose of that is to give them exposure to our best training captains and our most experienced captains for training purposes.
So these 4 New Zealand cadets, they were based in New Zealand initially?
We've had cadets trained in both countries. All of them, when we offered cadets a contract of employment, all the initial cadets were offered a contract of employment in New Zealand, which is where we want the cadets to work eventually. So that's where the positions have opened up. And now what we're doing is pushing them through the initial training procedures.
Sure. I just want, Senator Milne asked you questions about this on the 25th of February.
Yes.
And about whether there was a New Zealand $42,000 salary, base salary, and whether the cadets were operating in Australia.